Freud is still dead, but psychoanalysis may be experiencing a rebirth. This week, Maddie Freeman, 25, a candidate for a master's degree in social work at Smith College, was in town not only to see Waitress on Broadway but also for the American Psychoanalytic Association's annual conference at the New York Hilton Midtown, along with 1,600 or so other analysts in training and those who love them. On Valentine's Day, little bags of Necco conversation hearts were given out, swag from an insurance company. The 4-day Psyche Fest was a bonanza of seminars, from the doctrinaire to the esoteric, the practical to the political. You could bone up on telepathic dreams and the quantum hologram, which has something to do with parapsychological phenomena and was way over this reporter's head. Another seminar examined a streetcar named Desire from a structural and relational psychoanalytic perspective. There were talks on collaborative care in low-income communities, working with technologies like video conferencing, and how to influence healthcare and other public policies. A session on the ethics of mental health professionals commenting on public figures had drawn nearly 300 UPS at last count. There didn't seem to be a lot of unreconstructed Freudians hanging around or Lacanians, for that matter, though you could imbibe the canon at a seminar on the Wolf Man, or at another on the correspondence between Freud and his protege, Sander Ferenczi, and their falling out, which turned into a lively conversation about boundary violations and how ideas about them have evolved. One attendee recalled a bruising he received from his supervisor when he was a resident and had given a patient a New Yorker cartoon. "He spent 6 months torturing me," he said of the supervisor. "What was the scandalous cartoon?" "I can't remember, I've repressed it." Eyeing a reporter, another attendee joked, "I don't want the press to think we kiss our patients on the head. But we are getting ahead of ourselves." Tuesday was the new attendees' cocktail party, where the mood was almost effervescent, indicating that those in the psychoanalytic community don't appear to have social anxieties or perhaps have learned to cope with them. Jamie Steele, 36, a licensed family therapist in Atlanta who sported true-to-nature-size tattoos of tulips and other flowers on both arms, said she had been working on a PhD in philosophy when she was seduced by psychoanalytic theory, and pivoted. Now, she is a year into her training at Emory University Psychoanalytic Institute. "I have a big interest in how technology impacts our psyche," she said, "how the performance of the self creates a disconnect. Psychoanalysis speaks to us in a way that contemporary modalities and theories don't. Clinicians are seeking a different way of working with patients." Ms. Freeman, of Smith, works with homeless individuals who are addicted to opioids, and she uses relational psychoanalysis with these patients. Her college's curriculum, she said, is based on psychodynamic theory. "My folks aren't doing heroin because they picked it up one day," she said, referring to her patients. "There was trauma, and the drugs are just a symptom. You can't understand a person if you don't know the why." Also in attendance that night was Stephanie Siegmund, 29, a medical student at Columbia University's Center for Psychoanalytic Training and Research, where she is learning to become a better listener and a better doctor. She said, "If psychoanalysis continues to have an existential crisis battered by managed care, challenged by short-term approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy and medication, it is a paradigm that remains dear to this group." The American Psychoanalytic Association, known as APSA, which was founded 107 years ago, reports that the number of candidates in psychoanalytic training at its institutes is up slightly from 5 years ago, from 794 to 827. That figure doesn't take into account candidates at the more than 50 institutes around the country that aren't under the purview of APSA, which is affiliated with more than 30. Training can take from 2 to 4 years, and includes personal therapy. Certainly members are a tad defensive about what Harriet Wolff, the president of APSA, sees as reflexive Freud bashing. The profession may still be fighting social trends and a healthcare system that's looking for fast cures, she said, but it long ago moved on from strict dogma to embrace a range of modern clinical theories, social advocacy, and research. A traditional course of psychoanalytic treatment still means seeing a therapist several times a week for years or even decades, and yes, there are still couches. The paradox is that in this chaotic society, Dr. Wolff said, psychoanalysis has never been needed so much. Last February, a group of psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers wrote a letter to the New York Times averring that President Trump was mentally unstable and that the various pathologies they had diagnosed him with made him unfit for public office. It was a refutation of the so-called Goldwater Rule, adopted by the American Psychiatric Association in 1973, which said that giving a public figure a mental diagnosis without seeing him or her was unethical. The APA, a much larger group of psychotherapists than the APSA, struck back, maintaining its policy among its members. But Dr. Wolff's organization issued a statement granting its own members the freedom to air their opinions, and many of them did and continue to do so. A group called A Duty to Warn has been inspired by the legal tenet that impels a therapist to break confidentiality rules if a patient is going to do damage to himself or society. They have transported that idea from a clinical setting to the public realm, Dr. Wolff said, to warn the American public that they have a dangerous president. As of this week, a Duty to Warn Change.org petition demanding Donald Trump's removal from the White House had over 70,000 signatures. At the cocktail party on Tuesday, no one seemed to know the precise definition of the Goldwater Rule, but many were aware of the barrage of diagnoses that have been attached to the president, and appeared happy to contribute their own borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, said Ms. Freeman, cautioning that because she doesn't have her degree yet, she doesn't technically have the power to diagnose anyone. Laura Wayland, 57, a practicing psychologist who is now in her second year at the San Francisco Center for Psychoanalysis, said, "I've heard him described as a malignant narcissist or an exhibiting narcissist. I wouldn't say borderline. It's a question of degrees. Malignant or exhibiting are on the extreme ends of narcissism. This is a person whose thinking is so solipsistic, they really feel quite certain that what they think is how things are. He is so unfiltered, he invites people to see him in the way a psychoanalyst would. However," she added, "I think that what he's diagnosed with is not as important as pointing out to people that it matters what people say, and we can't say he didn't mean it even though he said it." Dr. Wolff would not tender a diagnosis. "I think we're well advised to be cautious about how we use diagnostic language for public figures," she said. "I think it really doesn't help. We need to reach those who can do something about the 25th Amendment, rather than throwing out labels. To quote Freud, where ID is, there shall ego be."